Gripping a gold-wrapped box, I stood near the cake at my parents' 35th anniversary. My mother's voice cut through the chatter, cold and sharp. "We didn't invite you." A second later, my father shoved my gift off the table, sending it crashing before dozens of guests. They thought it was a pathetic plea for attention. They had no idea it held the financial truth about the roof over their heads, and the daughter they trusted most. My name is Maisie Stewart, and I was exactly 2 minutes away from ruining my parents' perfect evening. The tires of my rental sedan crunched over the gravel driveway leading up to the Harbor View Lodge, a rustic but impossibly expensive lakeside restaurant nestled on the edge of Briar Glen, North Carolina. It was a picturesque evening, the kind of mild autumn night where the calm lake mirrored the stars perfectly, but my knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my heart hammered a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. On the passenger seat beside me sat a dense, rectangular box wrapped in meticulously folded gold paper. Tied tight with a dark crimson ribbon, it looked like a celebration. It felt like a bomb. I killed the engine and sat in the dark for a long moment, staring at the warm, glowing lights of the lodge. I had driven over 500 miles to get here, tracing the highways across state lines with nothing but the hum of the engine and the crushing weight of my own secrets for company. I had not received an invitation to this party. The thick, embossed card that had undoubtedly been mailed to every distant cousin, every nosy neighbor, and every member of the town choir had somehow entirely missed my mailbox in St. Louis. But I knew the date. You do not forget the day your parents took their vows, not when you have spent the last 2 years quietly bleeding yourself dry to ensure they still had a roof over their heads to celebrate under. I grabbed the gold box, its weight grounding me, and stepped out into the crisp air. The walk up the wooden steps to the main terrace felt like a march to the gallows. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the noise of the party washed over me, a tidal wave of clinking crystal, loud and joyful laughter, and a soft jazz quartet playing in the corner. The very first thing I saw was the massive banner draped across the vaulted ceiling. It read, in swirling, elegant letters, "Celebrating 35 years of Warren and Denise Stewart." Just below it, near the grand entrance, an ornate seating chart was displayed on a brass easel. I paused, my eyes scanning the alphabetized list of names. The Miller family, the Hendersons, Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen. I traced my finger down the final column. Stewart, Denise, Stewart, Warren, Stewart, Lila. The list ended there. There was no Maisie. There was not even a placeholder for a generic guest. I had been entirely, deliberately erased from the narrative of my own family. And if there is one thing our parents taught us, it is the true meaning of sacrifice. A voice echoed through the room, amplified by a pristine sound system. I looked toward the center of the room. There she was. My older sister, Lila Stewart, standing in the bright glow of a spotlight, holding a microphone like she owned the venue. She wore a stunning emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly over her shoulders, her hair styled into effortless waves. She was playing the role she had spent her entire adult life perfecting, the devoted, hyper-competent, savior daughter. She smiled warmly at the crowd, projecting an image of fierce family loyalty. She was the master of ceremonies, the orchestrator of this grand illusion. I gripped the gold box tighter and stepped further into the light of the ballroom. It took exactly 10 seconds for the ripple effect to happen. A neighbor near the entrance turned, her smile faltering as she recognized my face. Then someone else whispered. The soft murmur spread like a dark stain across the room until the collective gaze of nearly 100 people shifted toward the doorway. Lila stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a fraction of a second, the polished veneer cracked, revealing a flash of absolute panic, but she recovered instantly, lowering the microphone and fixing a tight, warning smile on her face. The crowd parted instinctively as my mother, Denise, stepped forward. She was wearing a lovely ivory gown, but her face was pale, drained of all the joy she had been radiating just moments before. She looked at me, then darted a nervous, trembling glance toward the crowd. terrified of a public scene. She closed the distance between us, her voice a harsh, frantic whisper that was still loud enough to carry in the suddenly quiet room. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes wide with a mix of embarrassment and dread. "We didn't invite you. Lila planned all of this." The words landed exactly where they were intended, a sharp punch directly to the chest, but I did not flinch. I looked past her to where my father, Warren, had risen from his seat at the head table. He did not look at me with surprise or relief. He looked at me with the cold, hardened calculation of a man staring down an intruder. He did not walk toward me. He did not offer a greeting, a hug, or even a chair to sit in. He simply stood there, a wall of resentment radiating across the room. The atmosphere had completely curdled. The jazz band had awkwardly stopped playing. The silence was thick and deafening. "I know I wasn't invited, Mom," I said, my voice steady, though my throat felt painfully tight. "But it is your 35th anniversary. I came to congratulate you both, and I brought a gift." I bypassed my mother and walked deliberately toward the front of the room, my heels clicking loudly against the polished hardwood floor. Every eye in the lodge tracked my movement. I reached the main table, beautifully decorated with a cascading floral arrangement and a towering 3-tiered vanilla cake. I gently placed the gold-wrapped box on the table, right next to the crystal cake knife. "Happy anniversary," I said directly to my father, who was standing just an arm's length away. Warren stepped forward, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his temple. He looked down at the gold box as if it were a diseased animal. Then, with a sudden, violent sweep of his right arm, he struck the box. It flew off the table, the heavy contents inside shifting with a loud thud as it hit the floor, sliding across the polished wood and stopping near the feet of a gasping elderly neighbor. "I do not want your gift," Warren's voice boomed, deep and trembling with years of misplaced anger. "I will not accept anything from the child who only shows up when she wants an audience, while your sister does all the real work." Someone in the back of the room gasped audibly. My mother buried her face in her hands. Lila stood frozen at the microphone, watching with a mixture of horror and vindication. I stood completely still. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice in defense. I looked down at the box on the floor, its pristine gold paper slightly crumpled at the corner, the dark crimson ribbon still holding strong. I took a slow breath, walked over to it, and crouched down to pick it up. As I rose, I looked around the room. I met the eyes of the people I had grown up with, my cousins, who suddenly found the ceiling very interesting, the friends from church, who stared intently at their shoes. They were all complicit in this narrative, all too willing to cast me as the villain because it was easier than asking the hard questions. I turned back to my father. He was breathing heavily, his chest puffing out in defensive anger. "I didn't come here for an audience," I said, my voice low but carrying absolute clarity in the completely silent room. "I came here with the truth." I did not wait for a response. I did not give them the satisfaction of a tearful breakdown or a shouting match. I simply turned on my heel and began the long walk back down the center aisle of the ballroom, the gold box pressed firmly against my side. The silence stretched out behind me, heavy and suffocating. As I reached the grand oak doors of the entrance, I stopped. Aunt Tessa Cole, my father's younger sister, was standing near the coat check. She was the only person in the room who had not looked away from me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a complex mixture of sorrow and burning curiosity. She had always been the one person who saw through the family's carefully constructed facades. I stepped up to her and held out the gold-wrapped box. She hesitated for a split second before taking it, her hands wrapping around the package. The sheer weight of it seemed to surprise her. I leaned in close, ensuring my voice was meant only for her ears, though the implication would echo through the entire family by the end of the night. "If they want to know who kept that roof over their heads," I told her, my voice completely unwavering, "let them open it themselves, without looking back." I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool, dark night, leaving the warmth of the lodge and the wreckage of my family behind me. 6 years prior to that night at the lodge, Briar Glen was not just my hometown, it was a tightly controlled stage, and my older sister Lila was its undisputed star. Growing up in the Stewart household meant learning your lines and hitting your marks. I was the quiet one, the girl who found refuge in heavy textbooks, complex puzzles, and the comforting predictability of mathematics. Lila was the exact opposite. She was a hurricane of charisma, always possessing the exact right phrase to make a distant aunt feel cherished or a nosy neighbor feel incredibly important. The dinner table was where our family dynamics were most clearly broadcast. The heavy oak table felt like a courtroom where I was perpetually assigned to the losing side. My father, Warren, thrived on Lila's vibrant energy. He would lean back in his chair, his booming laugh echoing off the dining room walls as she recounted some minor high school or college drama she had expertly resolved. "That is my girl," he would say, pointing his dinner fork at her. "Always knows how to work a room. You are going to run the world someday." Then, his gaze would slowly shift down the table to me. The warmth would instantly vanish, replaced by a heavy critical appraisal. "Maisie, you look like you are preparing for a funeral. Loosen up. You are always so severe, so unapproachable." My mother, Denise, never intervened. She was not a malicious woman, but she harbored a deep, paralyzing fear of conflict. She treated any raise in volume as a personal, physical attack. Instead of mediating or defending me, she simply surrendered the floor and the emotional labor to my sister, by default. Lila became the official spokesperson for our family. She did not just speak for my parents. She began to speak for me, translating my quietness into whatever narrative suited her best. "Maisie is just in one of her antisocial moods. Mom," Lila would announce when I chose to read in my room rather than entertain guests in the parlor. My mother would nod eagerly, deeply relieved to have an explanation that required no actual parenting or difficult conversations. I did not run away from Briar Glen, but my departure certainly felt like an escape. In college, I had majored in risk assessment and insurance claims analysis. It was a specialized field built entirely on unearthing the absolute truth beneath heavy layers of disaster, obfuscation, and human panic. When I secured a junior analyst position at Stone Harbor Risk and Recovery in St. Louis, Missouri, it felt like a lifeline thrown into deep water. I was moving nearly 500 miles away to build a life founded on facts, on my own terms. The day I packed my belongings into my used sedan, there were no tearful embraces or proud, lingering smiles from my parents. My father stood on the front porch, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his posture rigid. "I hope you find whatever it is you think you are looking for out there," he muttered, his tone dripping with a heavy, guilt-inducing disappointment. "Because God knows there are responsibilities here at home that you are just walking away from. Do not expect us to pause our lives waiting for you to realize it." He managed to make my professional ambitions sound like a callous, selfish betrayal. For the first 2 years in Missouri, I tried desperately to bridge the widening gap. I called home every single Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. I spent hours online searching for the perfect gifts, sending carefully wrapped packages for every birthday, every Mother's Day, every Father's Day, but my Sunday calls routinely went straight to a sterile voicemail box. The thank you notes for the gifts never arrived in my mailbox. Instead of my parents, I got Lila. Lila firmly established herself as the unyielding gatekeeper of the Stewart family. The text messages would chime on my phone, cold, clinical, and perfectly calculated to keep me exactly where she wanted me. "Dad is still really upset with you about leaving. I would give him some space if I were you. Mom is exhausted today. Maisie, she had a migraine. Do not call and make things tense right now. They received the package. It is fine, but please do not push them to talk. Let me handle them." I read those messages sitting alone in my small, sparsely furnished apartment, the ambient noise of the city pressing against my thin windows. I believed her. Why would I not believe my own sister? I internalized every single word, slowly convincing myself that my absence was a deep, festering wound I had selfishly inflicted upon them. I believed the silence was my rightful punishment for seeking a life outside of Briar Glen. That carefully constructed illusion held perfectly until a random Tuesday afternoon during my 3rd year in St. Louis. I was on a brief, casual phone call with my second cousin, Sarah, going over a trivial casserole recipe she wanted me to send her, right in the middle of discussing baking temperatures. She casually brought up my mother. "Oh, by the way," Sarah laughed lightly, "your mom wore that gorgeous navy blue cashmere shawl you sent her to the Sunday service last week. She was showing it off to the entire choir. She told everyone it was from her successful daughter in the city. She looked so incredibly proud." I froze completely. The coffee in my mug suddenly tasted bitter and metallic. Just 3 days prior, I had cautiously texted Lila to ask if my mother had liked the birthday gift. Lila's reply had been brutally sharp. She put it in the hall closet. "You know she does not like flashy, expensive things. You really do not know her anymore. Stop trying to buy her forgiveness." A cold chill washed over me. That had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing St. Louis winter outside my office window. My mother had worn the shawl. She had bragged about it to her friends. Lila had lied. It was such a small, seemingly insignificant lie, but it acted like a heavy iron crowbar, violently prying open a dark, hidden door in my mind. If she lied about a simple piece of clothing, what else was she lying about? Had she told my father I simply did not care enough to call? Had she told my mother I was too busy living a glamorous city life to bother with them? My professional training as a risk analyst instantly kicked in. When assessing a ruined building, you do not look at the intact paint. You look for the microscopic structural fractures in the foundation. I went to a local stationery store and bought a simple, black leather notebook. I started meticulously recording the dates, the exact wording of the text messages from Lila, and any offhand comments from other relatives I managed to catch. I documented the discrepancies. I had no hard evidence yet. There was no smoking gun, no intercepted emails or recorded phone calls to decisively prove my terrifying theory, but the massive foundation of guilt I had been carrying for years cracked wide open. I was not just naturally fading away from my family due to distance. I was being actively, systematically rewritten. I was being recast as the arrogant, absent villain in a family script I was not even allowed to read. And my sister was the one holding the pen. The catalyst for my family's quiet collapse did not come from an argument, but from the sky. Late in the summer, a freak, aggressive weather system stalled directly over the Carolina coast. For 48 consecutive hours, torrential rain and wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour battered Briar Glen. The storm ripped a massive section of shingles right off the roof of my parents' house, exposing the aging plywood underneath to a relentless downpour. Disaster rarely strikes just once. It usually brings a friend. 2 days after the storm, while trying to drag waterlogged insulation out of the attic, my father slipped on a wet joist. He fell awkwardly, severely herniating 2 discs in his lower back. Just like that, the main source of income for the Stewart household vanished. He was a man who worked with his hands, and suddenly, he could not even stand upright for more than 10 minutes. Medical bills began to stack up with terrifying speed. Arriving right alongside the massive estimates from local roofing contractors, Lila recognized a stage the moment it was built. Within a week of the accident, she had sent a mass group text to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family. The message was practically dripping with manufactured martyrdom. She announced that she was temporarily stepping away from her own social life to personally manage my parents' recovery. She boldly declared to an audience of over 40 relatives that she would handle all the insurance claims, navigate the medical bureaucracy, and manage the bank paperwork. In the eyes of our community, Lila was canonized on the spot. She was the devoted local daughter holding the crumbling walls together. I remained completely in the dark, comfortably ignorant in Missouri, until my phone rang at 10:15 on a Tuesday night. The caller ID showed Aunt Tessa. She did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. Her voice was hushed, frantic, and laced with a deep, unsettling anxiety. She was calling from her car. parked down the street from my parents' house so no one would hear her. Tessa told me the truth that Lila was fiercely guarding. The roof had not been fixed. It was covered by a massive blue plastic tarp that leaked every time it drizzled. But the physical damage was the least of their problems. According to a slip of paper Tessa had accidentally seen on the kitchen counter, my parents were 90 days past due on their mortgage. They were also severely delinquent on their county property taxes. They were standing on the absolute edge of a sheer financial cliff, mere weeks away from entering active foreclosure proceedings. My breath caught in my throat. Why didn't anyone call me? I demanded, my voice rising in the quiet of my apartment. I have savings. I can help. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and suffocating. When Tessa finally spoke, the words hit me like physical blows. Lila told everyone that she already asked you, Tessa whispered gently, though the information was brutal. She stood in the living room last Sunday and told your parents, and me, and Uncle Robert, that she begged you for help. She said you told her you were too focused on buying your own apartment in the city, and that you refused to send even a single dollar because you were afraid of draining your own accounts. I sat perfectly still on my sofa. The sheer audacity of the lie was paralyzing. Lila had not asked me for a dime. She had not even mentioned the mortgage or the taxes in any of her brief, dismissive text messages. She had intentionally painted me as a greedy, callous monster to elevate her own status as the sole, suffering savior. Tessa begged me not to confront Lila directly, terrified of the chaotic fallout it would cause for my injured father, and hung up. I did not sleep that night. By 7 o'clock the next morning, my shock had entirely burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and highly focused fury. I was a professional risk and recovery analyst. Finding the truth buried under layers of disaster and deceit was literally what they paid me to do every day. I bypassed the family drama entirely and went straight to the institutional source. Using public county records, I easily identified the bank that held the mortgage and the exact parcel number for the property taxes. By 9:30 that morning, I was on the phone with the county tax assessor's office. I utilized my professional credentials, speaking the exact bureaucratic language the clerks respected, to inquire about the delinquency status of the property. What the clerk told me turned my blood to ice. The tax account was flagged. The clerk noted that a woman claiming to be the authorized family representative had called exactly 5 weeks ago. This representative had passionately promised to wire a payment of $4,000 within 3 business days to halt any lien proceedings. Did the funds clear? I asked, gripping my pen so tightly my knuckles ached. No, ma'am. The clerk replied in a bored, clinical tone. The payment never arrived. The account is scheduled for final penalty assessment in 14 days. I hung up and immediately dialed the mortgage servicer. It took 45 minutes of navigating automated menus and transferring between departments, but I finally got a loss mitigation specialist on the line. I encountered the exact same terrifying ghost. The representative had called them too, asking for forbearance, promising a lump sum payment of $6,000 to bring the account current. And just like with the county, not a single penny had ever been sent. Lila was stalling. She was making empty promises to government offices and financial institutions to buy herself time, playing a dangerous game of chicken with our family home. But the most damning detail came right before I disconnected the call with the bank. I asked the specialist to confirm the primary mailing address for the default notices. The physical mail has been suspended at the borrower's request, the specialist stated. All default and foreclosure notices are currently being routed exclusively to the primary email address on file. She read the email address aloud. It was a slight variation of Lila's personal account. I leaned back in my desk chair, the scope of my sister's trap finally coming into terrifying focus. It was a complete information quarantine. My parents had no idea they were losing their house because Lila had successfully diverted every single warning siren directly to her own phone. She was filtering their reality. She was feeding them a narrative where she was fighting the big, bad bank on their behalf, when in reality, she was the one letting the clock run out while playing the hero. I stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. facing the heaviest decision of my life. My immediate instinct was violent exposure. I wanted to call my father, forward him the public tax records, and scream the truth into the phone. I wanted to drive back to North Carolina, kick the front door open, and drag Lila out of her carefully constructed spotlight. But my professional training forced me to calculate the collateral damage. If I attacked now, Lila would immediately play the victim. She would cry. She would claim I was confused, or she would blame the bank for making a clerical error. My parents, already exhausted and frightened, would instinctively protect the daughter who was physically standing in front of them making them soup. The ensuing family civil war would cause months of chaotic distraction. And during that distraction, the bank would foreclose. The county would seize the deed. If I spent my energy fighting my sister right now, my parents would end up homeless. I closed my eyes and took a long, steadying breath. I could not afford the luxury of immediate revenge. I had to secure the asset first. I had to become a ghost in the machine, quietly paying the massive debts, intercepting the disaster from 1,000 miles away, and making sure the foundation held strong. I chose the hardest path. I would save the house anonymously, letting Lila continue to wear her counterfeit crown, because if the house was lost, any truth I revealed later would be absolutely worthless. The financial rescue of my parents did not happen with a dramatic courtroom speech or a sudden lottery windfall. It happened in the suffocating silence of my apartment, lit only by the harsh blue glare of my laptop screen, surrounded by stacks of printed tax codes and mortgage statements. I began by draining my high-yield savings account, the one I had painstakingly built over the last 4 years. The first wire transfer was a massive, terrifying sum of money that wiped out my safety net entirely. It cleared the overdue property taxes and the accrued penalties just days before the county could initiate a tax lien sale. Next came the bank. I spent hours on the phone with the loss mitigation department, aggressively utilizing every piece of corporate jargon I had learned at my firm. I set up an automated clearinghouse draft to bring the mortgage current and establish a recurring monthly payment directly from my own checking account. But I was fiercely paranoid about my sister discovering the intervention. I invoked strict federal privacy regulations, threatening the bank representatives with immediate legal action if they ever disclosed the origin of the funds. I demanded that the payment portal reflect only an anonymous third-party remitter, as far as anyone looking at the statements would know. A nameless angel had simply intervened. I just wanted my parents to keep their home. I did not want a parade, and I certainly could not afford to tip off my sister. The mortgage was only half the battle. The gaping wound on their roof was still bleeding them dry. Based on the panicked updates from Aunt Tessa, I knew the initial insurance payout was criminally low. Lila had likely submitted the claim with zero supporting evidence, treating a complex structural loss like a minor fender bender. Using my professional access, I pulled the historical meteorological data for Briar Glen during the week of the storm. I compiled wind speed charts, cross-referenced local building codes, and drafted a meticulously detailed supplemental demand letter. I anonymously faxed it to the independent adjuster assigned to the file, highlighting the exact clauses in my parents' policy regarding replacement cost value versus actual cash value. The insurance company, suddenly realizing they were dealing with someone who understood the granular details of risk assessment, quietly reopened the file and issued a secondary check that covered a significant portion of the remaining repairs. However, even with the supplemental claim, there was a heavy financial shortfall to pay the local roofing contractors. I absorbed that blow, too. Survival in the modern world is a game of brutal mathematics, and my personal ledger was violently bleeding. I canceled my planned trip to Europe. I abandoned the application for my master's degree because the tuition was no longer a reality. When the transmission on my 10-year-old sedan began to slip, I ignored the flashing dashboard lights and simply started taking the city bus, adding 2 agonizing hours to my daily commute. I took on freelance data analysis contracts, working deep into the early morning hours until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. The first person to realize I was living on a razor's edge was my boyfriend, Nolan Price. Nolan was a custom carpenter, a man who built his life around solid foundations, Precise measurements and quiet observation. He did not need to see my bank statements to know something catastrophic was happening. He saw it in the dark, bruised circles under my eyes. He noticed when I stopped buying fresh produce and switched our dinners to bulk rice and discounted canned beans. He saw me staring blankly at the wall at 2 a.m. My jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. Nolan never demanded a tearful confession. He did not sit me down for a suffocating lecture about boundaries or financial independence. He simply observed the structural damage in my life and quietly stepped in to reinforce the beams. When my car finally refused to start, he spent an entire weekend under the hood, replacing the starter motor with a salvaged part he found at a junkyard, charging me nothing but a cup of coffee. He started paying the entirety of our utility bills and internet costs without ever asking for my half. He would show up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening with bags of heavy, nutritious groceries, quietly restocking my barren refrigerator while I was buried in freelance spreadsheets. He became the quiet, unshakable anchor that kept me from drifting into total ruin, allowing me to funnel every spare dollar back to North Carolina. Every month, usually on the first day, I would log into my banking app and watch a massive portion of my paycheck instantly vanish. I would stare at the rapidly shrinking balance, feeling a cold knot of panic tighten in my stomach. I would close my eyes, press my palms against the cold wood of my desk, and whisper a single phrase to myself like a prayer. As long as they are safe, that was the only metric that mattered. Even as the holidays passed in total silence, even as my phone remained completely devoid of any messages from my mother or father asking how I was doing, I clung to the fact that they were sleeping under a dry roof in a house they still owned. But the most agonizing part of my survival was the intelligence I received from Aunt Tessa. Every few months, she would call with dispatches from the family gatherings I was quietly funding but explicitly excluded from. During Thanksgiving, Tessa reported that my father stood up at the head of the table and offered a tearful toast to Lila. He praised her relentless dedication, telling the extended family how she had miraculously fought off the predatory bank and aggressively negotiated with the insurance adjusters to save their lives. At Christmas, my mother gifted Lila a vintage pearl necklace, crying as she called her the true backbone of the Stewart family. According to the official family narrative, I had completely vanished. I was the selfish, ambitious daughter who had abandoned them during their darkest hour to chase a fat paycheck in the city. My name became a taboo subject, a synonym for disappointment, eventually fading out of their conversations entirely. Lila soaked up the adoration, nodding humbly at the dinner table, accepting the praise for a financial miracle she had absolutely nothing to do with. She was playing the role of the martyr flawlessly, all while I was the one actually nailed to the cross. It was a profound, suffocating paradox. I was actively pouring my life savings, my career ambitions, and my physical health into a black hole just to keep my parents from drowning. I was using my absolute silence as a heavy shield to protect them from the stress of a foreclosure and the devastating reality of my sister's deceit. Yet, it was that exact same silence that gave Lila the perfect, undisputed space to construct her own reality. My silent sacrifice was the very mortar she was using to build a fake throne right in the center of our family. Nearly 2 years had dissolved since the storm, and the landscape of my family's power dynamic had entirely shifted. My sister was no longer just the golden child receiving praise at the dinner table. She was methodically becoming the legal architect of my parents' lives. Her strategy was a masterclass in soft power. Lila leveraged the manufactured goodwill of being their financial savior to slowly weave herself into the actual bureaucratic fabric of their existence. It started innocuously enough. She suggested they add her as an authorized user on their secondary checking account, just in case of an emergency. Then, she convinced them to grant her full online viewing access to their utility bills, medical portals, and retirement summaries. Eventually, she was resetting their passwords and managing their two-factor authentication under the guise of cybersecurity, effectively locking them out of their own digital lives. My mother, inherently terrified of formal paperwork and still traumatized by the looming threat of the bank, eagerly surrendered control. She treated every official envelope like a live grenade, willingly handing them over to Lila to defuse. My father, whose pride was as brittle as his injured back, leaned into the arrangement because Lila never made him feel incompetent. She always glided into the kitchen with perfectly manicured hands and smooth, reassuring answers, shielding him from the harsh mathematical realities of their situation. Aunt Tessa saw the creeping shadow long before I did. We had established a secure, encrypted messaging app to communicate, terrified that Lila was monitoring my parents' digital footprints. Late one evening in early October, Tessa called me, her voice uncharacteristically grim. "This is not just about her taking credit for your money anymore, Maisie," Tessa warned, the audio crackling slightly over the line. "She is consolidating legal control, inch by inch. They do not even sneeze without asking her if they can afford the tissues. It is getting dangerous." Then, Tessa sent the photograph. It was a blurry, hastily taken picture snapped inside my parents' study while Lila was out picking up a cake order. Sitting squarely on the mahogany desk was a thick, pristine, leather-bound portfolio. Embossed on the front in heavy gold lettering were the words, "Family Legacy Package." To my parents, that probably sounded like a beautiful, sentimental anniversary gift, perhaps a collection of old photographs or a genealogical tree. But to a risk analyst who spent her days reading through convoluted liability waivers and asset transfers, it looked like a loaded weapon. I did not know the exact contents, but my professional instincts screamed that it contained sweeping power of attorney authorizations, healthcare proxies, or even early estate transfer deeds. Lila was not just going to hand them a nice gift at their upcoming anniversary party. She was going to use the emotional high of the evening, surrounded by dozens of weeping relatives and cheering friends, to casually slide a pen across the table. She was planning to legitimize her absolute authority in front of an audience, cornering them into signing away their autonomy while they were too overwhelmed with gratitude to read the fine print. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. I could not let that happen. And for the first time in 24 months, I actually had the leverage to stop it. My brutal financial fasting had finally worked. The catastrophic debt was neutralized. The county tax account was paid in full, with 0 outstanding penalties. The mortgage was completely current, safely padded with a 2-month reserve I had painstakingly built. Even the physical house was healed. The contractor had finished the final inspection on the roof a week prior, and a brand new 30-year warranty had just been issued. Crucially, I had ensured the warranty was registered strictly under the names of Warren and Denise Stewart, severing any chance of Lila claiming ownership over the repairs. I cleared off my dining table in St. Louis and began to build my arsenal. I printed every single county tax receipt I had accumulated over the last 2 years. I downloaded the complete transaction history from the mortgage servicer, highlighting the exact dates and the routing numbers that traced directly back to my personal checking account. I printed the itemized invoices from the roofing contractor, the email threads where I had successfully argued with the insurance adjusters for the supplemental payout, and the official confirmation letters proving the partial liens had been entirely released. It was a mountain of undeniable, legally binding truth. But raw data is cold. It needed context. It needed a voice. I pulled out a piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery and uncapped my pen. I spent 5 hours writing the cover letter. I wrote until my hand cramped, pouring every ounce of grief, anger, and fierce love onto the page. I did not just list the thousands of dollars I had drained from my life. I explained the profound, agonizing reason behind my total silence. I wrote that I did not stay away because I was too busy or too selfish. I stayed away because I refused to turn their home into a war zone while it was still actively collapsing. I explained that I did not want their gratitude, their apologies, or their praise. I just wanted them, for the very first time in my adult life, to hear my story directly from my own mouth, free from my sister's relentless translation. I carefully stacked the pages, the receipts, the warranties, and the handwritten letter, ensuring every single document was perfectly aligned. I stared at the stack, feeling the immense gravity of what I was about to do. Just as I was reaching for a folder to hold the documents, my phone screen illuminated with a social media notification. It was a public post from Lila. She had uploaded a glowing, professionally edited photograph of the lakefront lodge where the anniversary party was going to be held. The caption was a massive paragraph of flowery, performative prose about enduring love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. She tagged my parents, several cousins, and a dozen family friends. At the very bottom, she had added a flurry of hashtags, ending with a firm, decisive declaration, family only. I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of aunts, uncles, and family friends were RSVPing with heart emojis and excited messages. There was not a single mention of my name. No one asked where I was. No one questioned my absence. It was a digital broadcast to the entire world that Maisie Stewart had ceased to exist. I locked my phone, the screen fading to black, my jaw set into a hard, unforgiving line. I did not need her invitation. I had the records, the receipts, and the truth. I picked up my phone and dialed my sister's number. It rang 4 times before she finally answered, her voice dripping with an artificially sweet, breathy tone that instantly set my teeth on edge. Maisie, wow. To what do I owe the pleasure? I am calling about the anniversary party this weekend, I said, keeping my voice entirely flat, entirely devoid of the trembling rage I felt. I need to know what time the venue opens for guests. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The pause stretched out, heavy and calculated. When Lila finally spoke, the sweetness was gone, replaced by a patronizing, exhausted sigh. Maisie, look, it is just going to be a very intimate gathering. Mom and Dad are still recovering from so much stress. They really do not want an awkward atmosphere right now. You understand, right? It is just better for everyone if we keep things peaceful. We can do a video call with you next week. She did not say the words that I was uninvited. She did not have the courage for direct, honest confrontation. She was relying on my deeply ingrained habit of retreating to keep me out of the picture. She wanted me to politely bow out so she could maintain her flawless narrative. Right, peaceful, I replied softly. I pressed the red button to end the call without saying goodbye. I was not going to stay away. I was not booking a flight to North Carolina to scream at my parents or throw a drink in my sister's face. I was going because my entire life had been hijacked. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a mold my sister had built, and I needed to take the pen back. I was going to return the right to tell my own life story. The next morning, I walked into the downtown office of Rebecca Sloan. Aunt Tessa had slipped me her contact information months ago. Rebecca was a razor-sharp estate and family law attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse and toxic asset transfers. I sat across from her heavy mahogany desk and laid out the massive mountain of documents I had compiled. Rebecca adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the county tax clearances, the bank wire transfer logs, and the 30-year roof warranty. She did not offer me pity. She offered me a tactical strike plan. Your sister is banking on the immense social pressure of a party to force a signature, Rebecca explained, her tone purely clinical and highly effective. If you just hand them a messy stack of papers, she will intercept it. She will say you are crazy, or she will hide it before they can process what they are looking at. You have to weaponize the presentation so it cannot be distorted. We are going to divide this evidence into 2 distinct layers within the same box. We spent 3 solid hours organizing the documents. The top layer, which Rebecca called the truth about the house, was designed to be easily digestible for a layman. If Lila caused a scene and the box spilled open, anyone in the room could understand it at a single glance. It contained my handwritten cover letter, a simplified spreadsheet of every single mortgage and tax payment I had made over the last 2 years, the official county tax clearance certificates, the new roof warranty bearing only my parents' names, the insurance adjustment letters, and the undeniable bank transfer confirmations linking my street, Lewis checking account to their Briar Glen debts. The second layer was buried beneath a thick, rigid piece of cardstock, That layer was the legal kill switch. It was designed strictly for my mother and father to read. Rebecca helped me draft a clear, bulleted summary of the glaring red flags associated with signing binding legal documents at social events. We included a formal template for requesting an independent legal review of any trust or estate paperwork. Finally, we added a stark, unavoidable list of questions my parents absolutely had to ask themselves before they surrendered their power of attorney to a single child. When I returned to my apartment, I assembled the final package. I chose a sturdy, rectangular box and carefully laid the 2 layers inside, ensuring the corners matched perfectly. Then, I wrapped it. I did not choose wrapping paper at random. I went to a specialty stationery store and purchased a roll of heavy, shimmering gold foil. 35 years ago, my mother had decorated her wedding reception entirely in ivory and gold. It was a deeply sentimental detail, a piece of family history that Lila usually monopolized. The gold paper was a beautiful, emotional camouflage wrapped tightly around an incoming hurricane. I tied it all together with a dark crimson ribbon, pulling the knot as tight as my own nerves. The morning of my flight, the sky over Missouri was a dark, bruising purple. Nolan drove me to the airport in his battered truck. The heater blasted warm air, fighting off the biting chill of the early dawn. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing highway lights, the gold box resting heavily on my lap. My stomach was a tight, twisted knot of pure adrenaline and terrifying anticipation. Nolan parked the truck near the departure terminal and killed the engine. He did not immediately reach for the door handle. Instead, he turned to me in the dim light of the cabin. He looked at the box, then looked directly into my eyes. "Listen to me," Nolan said, his voice a low, steady rumble that anchored me to the present moment. "You are not going down there to win a fight. You are not going there to make them apologize, and you are not going there to punish them. You are going there for one reason only, so that when you wake up tomorrow morning, you are no longer living inside a story that somebody else wrote about you." I swallowed hard, the profound truth of his words vibrating in my chest. I nodded once, unbuckled my seatbelt, and leaned over to kiss him. It was a brief, grounding promise that I would come back whole. An hour later, I was walking down the narrow aisle of a commercial airliner, finding my window seat. The flight attendant politely asked me to place my personal items in the overhead bin or beneath the seat in front of me. I slid my purse under the seat, but I adamantly refused to let go of the gift. I kept the gold-wrapped box firmly on my lap. I placed both of my hands flat against the smooth, shimmering foil lid. I felt the low rumble of the jet engines vibrating through the floorboards, matching the frantic, heavy rhythm of my own pulse. I kept my hands pressed tightly against the box for the entire 500-mile journey, pressing down as hard as I could, holding on to it as if it were the only thing keeping my heart from shattering into 1,000 pieces before I even reached the ground. I stood in the freezing gravel parking lot, the biting wind whipping my coat around my legs, my eyes fixed on the glowing amber windows of the lodge. I was not inside the ballroom to witness the blade finally drop, but Aunt Tessa later painted every agonizing, chaotic second of it for me with terrifying precision. She ensured I knew exactly how the stage collapsed. What follows is how Tessa told it to me later, word for word where she could remember, and in her own sharp, furious version where she could not. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, the suffocating silence in the room stretched until it threatened to snap. My sister, ever the seasoned performer, immediately moved to control the narrative. Lila picked up the silver microphone, forcing a bright, indulgent laugh that echoed hollowly off the vaulted ceilings. "Well," Lila announced, gesturing gracefully toward the towering 3-tiered dessert. "Every family has its little dramas, don't they? But tonight is about celebrating 35 beautiful years. Let us not let a brief interruption ruin this perfect evening. Dad, Mom, why do we not cut the cake?" A few guests near the front tentatively shifted in their seats, eager to accept the comfortable lie and move past the brutal awkwardness. But Aunt Tessa did not return to her table. Holding the heavy gold-wrapped box against her chest, Tessa marched straight down the center aisle. She bypassed the murmuring relatives and stopped directly in front of the head table. With a loud, resounding thud that made my mother flinch, Tessa slammed the box down onto the exact spot where it had been violently shoved away only minutes prior. "If anyone wants to continue this party," Tessa declared, her voice projecting clearly across the room without the need for a microphone. "We are opening this box first." Warren slammed his hand flat against the table, the silverware rattling. He looked at his sister with pure, unadulterated fury. "Tessa, I will not have you humiliate us further. Get that garbage out of here. The only garbage in this room is the story we have been fed for the last 2 years." Tessa fired back, completely unfazed by his anger. "Denise, open it." My mother stared at the shimmering gold foil as if it were coated in poison. Her hands were trembling so violently she could not even reach for the crimson ribbon. "Fine, I will do it," Tessa said. She did not bother with preserving the presentation. Tessa ripped the crimson ribbon apart and tore the gold foil away, discarding the shreds onto the pristine white tablecloth. She lifted the lid. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the soft rustle of heavy paper as she pulled out the first layer of documents. Tessa held up the top sheet. It was the official, stamped ledger from the county tax assessor, stapled directly to the bank wire transfer confirmations. "Let us start with the foundation," Tessa announced, her eyes scanning the dense columns of numbers. She looked up and locked eyes with my father. "Warren, your property taxes and your mortgage arrears, they were paid in full, but they were not paid by the daughter standing behind you. Every single cent, thousands of dollars, was wired directly from a checking account belonging to Maisie Stewart." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Warren froze, the color rapidly draining from his face as the absolute certainty of Tessa's words hit him. Lila stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hands twitching. "Aunt Tessa, you are confused. Those papers could be forged. I managed those accounts." Tessa ignored her entirely. She reached into the box and pulled out the crisp, heavy stock of the 30-year roof warranty and the supplemental insurance adjustment letters. "And the roof over your head," Tessa continued, her voice rising in volume and authority, forcing the entire room to listen. "The negotiations with the insurance company for the supplemental payout. The payments to the local contractors, handled entirely by Maisie. It is right here in black and white. She did not abandon you to the storm. She bought the shingles that are keeping you dry right now." The crowd shifted, the atmosphere turning heavy with the sudden, crushing weight of the truth. The people who had just been dabbing their eyes in admiration for Lila were now exchanging horrified, bewildered glances. But Tessa was not finished. She dug deeper into the first layer and pulled out the printed screenshots I had meticulously gathered. The routing rules from the mortgage portal. "This is the part that makes me sick," Tessa said, her voice dropping into a low, furious register. She held the papers up for the front tables to see. "These are the default notices from the bank. The warnings that you were about to lose the house. They never reached your mailbox. Warren, they were digitally redirected to an email address exclusively controlled by Lila. She intentionally blinded you so she could play the hero." The mutiny in the ballroom was instantaneous and completely silent. The absolute devotion Lila had cultivated evaporated into thin air. Relatives who had praised her for 2 years stared at her with open disgust. Lila's emerald silk dress suddenly looked less like a gown and more like a costume she had been caught stealing. She took a step back, her hands raised defensively. "I was just trying to help organize things. They were overwhelmed. I was filtering the stress so they could heal." "You were building a throne on your sister's broken back," Tessa snapped. Tessa then picked up the handwritten letter. She did not read the entire 5 pages, but her eyes found the heavily underlined paragraph in the center. She read my words aloud, her voice wavering slightly with emotion. "Maisie writes, I chose to remain entirely silent not because I am weak, and not because I do not care. I stayed silent because I refused to turn the home that you love into a war zone while the walls were actively caving in. I did not want your applause. I just wanted you to be safe. My mother broke. A loud, agonizing sob tore from her throat, and she buried her face in her hands, weeping with the crushing realization of exactly who she had exiled. Warren sank slowly back into his chair, his broad shoulders practically caving in under the weight of his own blinding pride and catastrophic misjudgment. Tessa reached into the box one final time, her fingers brushing against the heavy cardstock divider. She lifted it, revealing the hidden, secondary layer of documents that Rebecca Sloan had helped me draft. Tessa's eyes scanned the bold, capitalized warnings at the top of the page. She looked up, her expression shifting from righteous anger to pure, unadulterated alarm. She turned sharply toward Lila, then back to my parents. "Warren, Denise, listen to me very carefully," Tessa commanded, her tone slicing through the sound of my mother's weeping. "Did Lila give you a leather binder tonight?" Something called a family legacy package. Warren, entirely dazed, numbly pointed toward a decorative gift table near the stage. The thick leather-bound portfolio sat there, waiting to be presented. Oh. Maisie had a lawyer review the situation, Tessa read from the paper, her voice ringing like a final judgment. "She warns that you are in immediate danger of signing away your legal autonomy. You are absolutely forbidden from signing a single piece of paper from that portfolio tonight. No power of attorney, no asset transfers, no healthcare proxies." At the mention of the legal terms, the last remaining color drained entirely from Lila's face. She looked perfectly, terrifyingly pale. Her grand, elaborate scheme to force a legal surrender in front of a cheering crowd had been entirely dismantled by the ghost she thought she had successfully banished. She stood frozen under the harsh spotlight, her empire of lies reduced to ash on the banquet table. I did not sleep a single minute on my flight back to Missouri. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, the sky over the city was bleeding into a dull gray dawn. I expected a barrage of voicemails, a frantic digital fallout from the explosion I had left behind in North Carolina. My phone remained entirely silent. It was not until slightly past 9 o'clock the following morning that a heavy, jarring knock echoed through my small living room. When I opened the front door, the contrast was so stark, it physically knocked the breath out of me. Standing in the drab, fluorescent-lit hallway of my building were my parents. They looked entirely shattered. The glamorous veneer of the anniversary gala had been completely stripped away by a grueling 10-hour drive through the dead of night. My father was still wearing the wrinkled trousers of his expensive suit. His shoulders slumped, the arrogant defiance completely drained from his posture. My mother looked small, her eyes swollen and red, clutching the lapels of a heavy wool coat. Between my father's rough hands was the gold-wrapped box. The foil was torn and mangled, held together clumsily by several strips of clear packing tape. They did not have an audience anymore. There was no microphone, no cascading floral arrangements, and no orchestrator standing behind them to feed them their lines. It was just the harsh reality of a Tuesday morning in a cramped city apartment. I stepped back and pulled the door open wider, offering no immediate warmth, no tearful embrace. "Come in." They walked into my kitchen, looking entirely out of place among my mismatched chairs and the lingering smell of cheap coffee. My father placed the battered gold box gently on the center of my scarred wooden dining table, as if he were laying down a fragile glass bomb. He kept his hands on it for a long moment before looking up at me. "I drove straight through the night," Warren began, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. "We did not know what to say on the phone. I did not know how to dial your number and speak into a machine after what I did." He swallowed hard, his eyes dropping back to the taped foil. "I am profoundly sorry for pushing this onto the floor, Maisie. But more than that, I am so deeply ashamed that I let your sister be the author of your life for the last 6 years. I never bothered to ask you for your side of the story. I just took the easy answer because it was handed to me." My mother sat down heavily on a wooden chair. She did not reach for my hand. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that the chasm between us could not be bridged with a simple apology. I saw the cracks, Denise confessed, her voice trembling but surprisingly clear. I saw the way the stories Lila told about you did not match the daughter I raised. But I was so terrified of the arguments. I was so scared that if I questioned Lila, the entire house would fall apart. I chose to keep the peace, Maisie, and by choosing to keep the peace, I let you disappear. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms over my chest. The urge to rush forward, to hug them and absolve them of their guilt, was a deeply ingrained instinct I had to actively suppress. Healing a fractured bone requires setting it straight, even if the reset causes immense pain. I could not offer them instant absolution. Love does not require me to accept being erased from my own family. I am glad you drove here, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured, devoid of both anger and immediate forgiveness. But we are not going back to the way things were before the storm. If we are going to rebuild this family, the foundation has to be entirely different. I have 3 absolute conditions. My parents nodded slowly, hanging on to my every word. Condition number 1, I stated, holding up a single finger. Direct communication. If you want to know how I am doing, you call my phone. If I do not answer, you leave a voicemail, and I will call you back. There are no more spokespersons. Lila does not speak for me, and she does not filter your words to me. Agreed, my father said instantly, without a shred of hesitation. Condition number 2, I continued. You will never again sign a financial or legal document in a crowded room, during a holiday, or when you are feeling emotional pressure. Not from me, not from Lila, not from anyone. My mother nodded, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks as the reality of the previous night washed over her again. And condition number 3, I finished, my voice hardening. Every single decision regarding the house, your retirement accounts, or your healthcare directives must be reviewed by an independent professional who is not biologically related to this family. You are going to hire an attorney, and you are going to audit everything. Warren straightened his posture slightly, the old, responsible patriarch flickering back to life under the harsh light of accountability. I will call Rebecca Sloan the second her office opens tomorrow morning. We will review every piece of paper Lila ever put in front of us. The insurance policies, the bank mandates, all of it. He reached into the inner pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket. His hand emerged holding a thick, folded stack of papers. It was the contents of the leather portfolio Lila had tried to present at the party. Tessa grabbed this off the gift table before we left the lodge, Warren explained, his voice turning cold as he slid the documents across my kitchen table. We stopped at a diner halfway through Kentucky to read it. You were right. Maisie, it was not a scrapbook. I pushed off the counter and walked over to the table. I picked up the heavy legal documents. It took me less than 5 minutes of scanning the dense, bureaucratic paragraphs to find the kill switch. It was buried deep within the 3rd section, masked under comforting language about elder care and family legacy. It was a springing power of attorney, combined with an irrevocable living trust transfer. The document explicitly stated that if either of my parents suffered a decline in physical mobility or cognitive function, a single physician's note procured by the primary caretaker would immediately transfer total, uncontested control of the estate to Lila. It essentially stripped them of their right to a judicial competency hearing. Lila had intentionally weaponized my father's back injury. She was setting the stage to declare him physically incapable of managing the property, allowing her to legally absorb the house I had just spent 2 years saving from foreclosure. The signature lines at the bottom were perfectly highlighted with little yellow flags, just waiting for the stroke of a pen amid the tears and applause of a 35th anniversary. I dropped the papers back onto the table. The sheer, calculated malice of the trap left a metallic taste in my mouth. I am done bleeding my bank accounts dry, I said, looking directly at my parents. The exhaustion was heavy in my bones, but the resolve was absolute iron. I will not send another dollar to fix a roof or pay a tax bill. That part of my life is over. My mother looked down at her hands, fully accepting the boundary. But, I added, leaning forward, resting my palms flat on the documents. "I am not walking away from you. I will not save you with my wallet anymore, but I will stand beside you in that lawyer's office. We are going to lock the truth down with ironclad legal bindings, not just tears and apologies. We are going to take the pen back, permanently." The climax of our family fracture did not happen with screaming in a crowded ballroom. It happened in the freezing, sterile environment of Rebecca Sloane's downtown law office, accompanied by the quiet rustle of legal paper and the hum of an air conditioning vent. Sitting across the massive oak conference table were my parents, looking exhausted but deeply focused. Next to them sat a regional compliance officer from the bank, brought in to formally verify the origins of the incoming wire transfers. And sitting at the far end of the table, rigidly upright and radiating a cornered, defensive energy, was my sister Lila. She had been formally summoned under the explicit threat that failure to appear would result in an immediate injunction against all accounts bearing her name. Rebecca Sloane did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened a thick manila folder and began to surgically dismantle the illusion my sister had spent years constructing. Rebecca laid out the undeniable timeline. She matched the exact dates of the bank foreclosure warnings to the exact dates those notices were digitally rerouted to Lila's private email address. She then presented the wire transfer receipts, mathematically proving that every single dollar used to save the house originated from my checking account in Missouri. Finally, Rebecca placed the notorious leather-bound portfolio flat on the table, opening it to the clause that would have granted Lila uncontested unilateral control over our parents' estate. Lila crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her jaw set in a hard line. She immediately pivoted to the only weapon she had left. She tried to use morality as a shield against the glaring legal reality. "This is ridiculous," Lila scoffed, her voice sharp and trembling with indignation. "You can look at all the spreadsheets you want, but paper does not tell the whole story. I was the one who was physically here. When Dad fell, I was the one taking him to physical therapy. I was the one making sure they ate. Maisie packed up and abandoned us for the city. I stayed. I managed the chaos because no one else would step up. I kept this family breathing." She looked at our parents, desperately trying to pull on the familiar strings of guilt and gratitude, but the strings had been cut. "Filtering the stress is one thing," the bank compliance officer interjected, his voice incredibly flat and devoid of any emotion. He pushed a printed log across the table. "But actively falsifying financial intentions is entirely different. We pulled the audio transcripts of the calls made to our loss mitigation department. On 4 separate occasions, a woman identifying herself as Denise Stewart verbally promised incoming wire transfers that never materialized. Furthermore, several extension requests were signed electronically using an IP address registered to your residential internet provider. Lila, you were not just managing their paperwork. You were impersonating the primary account holders to stall federal default protocols." The room went dead silent. The twist was devastatingly simple. Lila had not merely been a buffer, she had been actively forging authorizations, assuming she could infinitely delay the inevitable while soaking up the praise. "The documents in that leather portfolio," Rebecca added, tapping the heavy pages with her pen, "were structured to capitalize on a manufactured crisis. You created the panic by hiding the warnings, and then you planned to present yourself as the only legal solution." Rebecca leaned back, folding her hands. She explained that while they were not currently pressing criminal fraud charges, keeping the matter out of the criminal courts was strictly contingent on Lila's immediate, total surrender. She had exactly 48 hours to legally relinquish her status as an authorized user on every single bank account, credit card, and insurance policy my parents held. Any outstanding power of attorney was officially revoked. Furthermore, Rebecca's firm was opening a comprehensive civil audit into every transaction Lila had touched over the past 2 years to ensure no other assets had been compromised. Lila's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She turned frantically toward our father, her eyes pleading for him to override the lawyers, to protect his golden child from the harsh light of accountability. "Dad, please, you know me. You know I only ever wanted to protect you and Mom. You cannot let her do this to me." Warren Stewart looked at his eldest daughter. The man who had spent a lifetime amplifying Lila's voice finally saw the incredible damage her words had caused. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table, sitting up straighter than I had seen him in years. "Your sister is not doing anything to you," Warren said, his voice carrying a profound, quiet weight that commanded the entire room. "We are doing this. We allowed you to take the wheel because we were scared, and you drove us right to the edge of the cliff." He paused, looking Lila directly in the eyes, delivering the ultimate emotional shift of power. "You do not get to speak for this family anymore, Lila. Never again." Lila shrank back into her leather chair, the fight completely draining out of her. The absolute authority she had wielded for years was instantly dissolved by a single, undeniable sentence from the father she had manipulated. Before we left the office, Denise picked up a pen with a steady hand. She signed a new, transparent set of directives. The new framework established mandatory direct communication, retained Rebecca Sloan's firm as an independent financial advisor for all estate matters, and explicitly stated that no single child would ever hold unilateral power over their medical or financial decisions. As we walked out into the bright afternoon sun, my parents turned to me. The gratitude in their eyes was overwhelming, but I quickly raised my hand to stop the apologies before they could start. I refused to accept the crown of the newly established family savior. "I am not taking Lila's place," I told them clearly, standing on the sidewalk. "I am not going to be the emotional or financial ATM for this family. We are going to rebuild this relationship through actual, consistent honesty. We call each other. We visit when we can. We tell the truth, even when it is ugly. That is the only way I am staying in your lives." They agreed, entirely stripped of their old defenses, ready to do the hard, unglamorous work of genuine repair. 3 months later, we sat in a quiet, warmly lit booth at a small diner halfway between Missouri and North Carolina. It was our third face-to-face meeting since the lawyer's office. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping dramatic gestures, just a normal, quiet lunch between a daughter and her parents. Sitting right in the center of the wooden table, next to the salt shaker and the paper napkins, was the gold-wrapped box. My mother had brought it with her. It was heavily battered, covered in tape, and completely empty of any legal documents. It no longer served as a weapon of revenge or a piece of irrefutable evidence. It sat there as a silent, powerful anchor. It was a constant reminder that a family can survive catastrophic mistakes, deep deception, and years of painful silence, but only if they promise that no single person will ever hold the monopoly on telling someone else's story. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. I would love it if you could subscribe to the Zoe Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your incredible support by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people around the world.